to see your faces tonight, but then we get to see them throughout this coming week. I'm going to introduce our president, Dr. Marvin Ray Mickle, who will introduce tonight's speaker. Thank you.
Again, welcome. It is wonderful to have all of you here to share in this evening's conversation with Dr. Fletcher about the issues of disability and the ways in which that impacts those of us who are in ministry, in the life of the church, and in the broader society. And so I'm just thrilled that my friend of many, many years is here. You heard him refer this afternoon to Antioch Baptist Church in Cleveland, a church in which his mother and he were members, and a church at which I became the pastor, 2 pastors removed from the pastor that he was referring to, Wade Hampton McKinney. But I came to know Garth, his wife Karen, and their family during those years, and then have watched their ministry unfold over time. It is a fascinating combination of gifts. If you were to take somebody who had a bachelor's degree from the New England Conservatory of Music and a master's and a Ph.D. from Harvard and merge those together into a sensitive spirit that is 1/2 Jamaican and 1/2 American, and roll all of that into one person. And then add on to that the sensitivities and the vulnerabilities that are attached to his present life, essentially in a wheelchair. Garth was involved with his wife in a horrific auto crash, in which both of them sustained massive injury. I say this to you in his presence to say to you who are not presently in any disabled condition that we are temporarily able. Well, that ought to be the category. Temporarily able. Because you don't know what tomorrow holds. You don't know. Yeah. I used to make hospital calls with Sam Proctor, and I'd be looking in the rooms, and he would say, McMickle, don't think that couldn't be you tomorrow. So it is important that we be sensitized, especially in theological education, in the life and work of the church, that this is a growing component of our population. And what better way to learn about it than to have someone who's walked that road and lived through those experiences come and tell us his story, part of which we heard today in chapel, and the remainder of which will be provided tomorrow. So he is presently living in Dallas. His wife still teaches at the Perkins School of Theology. They both got PhDs from Harvard. All right. They both had splendid academic careers. And we're going to try to talk Garth into being a part of our online programming. We talked about this a little bit on the phone, to use his experiences and his expertise, but to use it in a way that doesn't require him to come here to do it. He can just do that for us from Dallas and be a part of our life's work. So I introduce to you my friend, my former parishioner, but he was never really that. He was always my brother. I'm just so happy that he's here. So glad to see him, and so glad to be a part of his life. Dr. Garth Baker-Fletcher.
Thank you. You know, I took this very seriously, much more seriously than my wife said I should. She looked and she said, "Huh?" She said, "People are not going to be able to listen to that." I said, "Yes, but they need to know that I know." And is that better? Yes. Thank you. Okay. And you know, a lot of disability experiences are exact the way that Dr. McMickle said. you are simply going into a car drive. You and your husband are unfortunately fighting. I don't know why this happens. My great-grandfather used to say, whatever you do, don't ever fight with somebody that is driving. But people do. They drive, fight, and the next thing they know, somebody gets T-boned. And whoever got T-boned either dies or is permanently disabled. I mean, it's just that, it's those kind of choices. People that go out, I met people in the hospital that were motorcycle drivers. Oh man, they were in fabulous shape. It just looked great, but they lost the ability to feel both of their legs. And what the common thread was that none of us knew. Coming up in the morning, God didn't give us any warning. We didn't have dreams at night. I know some people get dreams at night. I'm a dreamer. But when all this happened, I never dreamed. So I want you to stick with me a little bit, knowing that what happened to me was the result of an accident of watching my son drive. My son was driving. He was new. And I don't know if you know when you have a son that's 24, he's good. I'm not saying he's cocky, he's just good. He was good. And we're going up one of these blind things where you go up on the highway and the sun comes and hits you right at that moment. And for a moment, the sun literally blinds you. You can't see anything. So he was reaching that point, but he had slowed down. But the man behind him hadn't seen the traffic slow down. He came and hit us full force. And then, as Dr. Max said, it was a very, very terrible accident. And I'm very, very glad to be alive. And I tell people so they'll understand, I had 5 surgeries on my left hip and pelvis. I told them at first they were going to have to do more artistry and sculpting than they would, fixing, because they had to actually rebuild something that had been broken. And they did, and then they twisted, and then they put this in and that in. And now finally they've given me this little thing. So I have like 2 or 3 rods that are trying to hold this leg together. And I could just be upset about it.
Amen.
Because I'm really happy to be able to share this with you. So, let's talk. We talked a little bit about challenging the church. And challenging the black church. And we were talking about some of the complications, the good that we can, the good that we can celebrate, as well as the things that we need to look at as challenges for the African American church. This is called challenging disabilities. When I get to something that seems too long-winded and I'm going to be looking up at you, and it will look like you're about to fall asleep, let's just set the scene so that you may have a better idea into the historical experience of people with disabilities. Follow closely now, because I am going to be moving quickly. There's not much to say and not enough time and space to say it all. We are going to take several theoretical approaches to the reality of disability in our time, compare them, and conclude with fruitful things to keep from each approach. Not keep from the approach, but keep from the approach. Right? The initial theoretical approaches have already been used in the disability theory world. Careful descriptions of each theoretical approach will reveal both important contributions as well as less influential thoughts embedded in each theory. I will be careful to note significant differences between each approach's usage of disability theory. Second, these theoretical approaches are based on an uplifting, slightly different contemporary critical idea that makes it difficult but possible for us to see their differences pop out at us. For instance, I am convinced that using such a careful approach as disability approach discourse will reveal the insights and strengths and weaknesses that disability scholars will have not named as clearly as they should. There are so many ideas out there that a kind of hegemony of disability discourse has been applied to all persons with disabilities, undermining even our best efforts to contribute something unique, and thereby limiting the scope of our own critical theoretical strengths. We are not at the historical point for a new hegemony, but we are at the exciting stage where we can conquer, evaluate, and contrast our differing discursive attitudes. My hope is that by using this appreciative yet critical examination of each approach, we can spend up the stale expectations that we have repeated to each other as if there were no other ideas left. 2 words. I don't know if you understand them. When I was first in school, they would say the word, I honestly didn't know what it meant, so I will tell you. The word hegemony has to do with what the governing, or the discourse that has the most power and is ruling over. Okay, everybody's cool with that? You know about hegemony. Okay, what is the discourse? Anybody want to give me a hand? What's the discourse? That's a little bit more wordy. But it is another word that we use quite a deal in schools. Right, so I just use the word 3 times, discursive attitude. Anybody want to just tell me what that discourse means? Go ahead, try it.
Well, it starts with reading and writing, but it extends to ways of knowing and ways of being. So it's the way language is used to structure and reify culture, beliefs, society, etc.
Very nice. And that sounded almost as hard as what I was. You have to do this. Read a language. You know, no. A discourse really simply is just the language and the conversation that is taking place using reading, theories, and all of these other things to support itself. Okay? So a discursive attitude can be hegemonic. It can be radical. It can be left-wing. It can be right-wing. It can be judged as radical and unimportant, or it can be judged as a radical and very important discursive. Discursive approach. So, everybody clear on that? Then? Discursive and hegemony? Yes? Yes? All right, good. Thank you. Now, historical trials incorporate the themes and the theoretical approaches. Disabled persons have not suffered in silence as though we had no opinion of our own. We just suffered racism, classism, homophobia, patriarchy, still being identified. These elements hold our progress back, but they have not been detected, discerned, and debunked by progressive leaders since the start of our activism. Disabled persons, in other words, will never be the disorganized, disempowered, disenchanted, disenfranchised individuals who view themselves as fighting a lonely battle by themselves. As separate and separated individuals, we struggle in an uneasy silence that masks our true feelings. But as a group, all of those feelings, complaints, and modes of harassment are being described as customs, practices, and words by disabled persons. So they're constantly subjected on a constant basis to deconstruction. Deconstruction means what? Construction, we build something. Deconstructed, we take it apart. Okay. For those of you that grew up African American, my grandfather, 8th grade education. Grandfather, 8th grade education. Read the newspaper every night. He would read it, and then he would deconstruct it. And so when my daughter was at Harvard, you know, she's doing deconstruction with all these different people, and, you know, all these different names, all these, you know, and they're so talented in this. And she's like, you know, she finally told one teacher, she says, this is nothing more than when I hear my granddaddy do every night. So deconstruction means that you're taking apart, you know, something that seems to have one overarching theme and discourse, and you're just taking it apart as if it were several that have been glued together, and deconstructing means that you pulled it apart so you can finally see what it really looks like. And see what the lies are, see what the pieces that are only added to confuse. That's what deconstructive is. Okay. So, after describing customs, practices, and words that disabled persons are constantly subjected to on a constant basis, we can deconstruct the secret life of hegemony, still swimming around like great white sharks, ready to destroy anything in their path. All of these oppressors believe that they have silenced all of opposition by electing and re-electing an African-American political maverick, Barack Obama. Yet Brother Obama has met a stone-walled silence, unwillingness to act, and even a preference for ruining the everyday practices of politics because of those reactionary persons who would rather organize a tea party and reconfigure and rejuvenate the local plan. And spoken out in so-called neutral languages about so-called conservative politics and resisting, and I love this term, liberal overreach. Disability activists have found themselves adrift in a sea of confusing reactions to our demands for equality. While both conservative and liberal politicians have struggled to find a way of addressing persons that history teaches us, we're taught to believe they were subhuman, that they were freaks, abnormal. Their level of inclusion in persons with disabilities really depended upon how many kinds of freaky and weird disabled people they knew. Conservative politicians are proudly leading negative reactions by so-called traditionalists to the challenge of inclusion and access for all. One heartening factor is that most of these traditionalists do not want to be condemned by historians of being the same kind of nasty and aggressive resistors and oppressors that their parents and grandparents stood for in the 1950s and 70s. Oppressive reactions have arisen from the middle class, nor find by naming a non-human treatment fully formed as impairments, so that the paradoxical consequence that they have become more invisible and vulnerable as a result is in fact owing to the ideology of ability. Ideology of ability. We'll talk about that, but you underline that. The most visible, the disability, the greater the chance that the disabled person will be repressed from public view and forgotten. So the genuinely disabled person performs a masquerade that affirms the existence of disability even as it represents it as not existing in the real world. So what are the choices for the disabled? Disabled persons are learning how to actually embrace their atypical embodiment of their humanity, organizing into a growing power that is demanding change of political and legal laws and attitudes. Ours is one that is taking place in the so-called bizarre psychology discourse and exquisite performances of what are now called postmodern society. Even though our current battles were begun and influenced by the colonial era of Europe and America for the last 100 years. Importantly, these three approaches overflag each other's trajectories, interwave, mutually strengthen each other's political and legal interventions, and find solidarity with groups like those who have fought racism and sexism in particular. this ideological approach of overlapping and intersecting identifications, analysis, and demands are what feminists and womanists, or black feminists, have called intersectionality. Intersectionality, by the way, was a term that was invented, created by an African-American legal critical theorist named Kimberly Crenshaw. She used the term way back in 1989, and it just sat there. And then all of a sudden, everybody just started popping up with the word, as if it had been out there all the time. But that's because the word is so appropriate to what, in fact, they seem to be experiencing. Intersectionality. We welcome recognizing that our critical interrogation of ableism has intersections with other scholars and activists because their commonly identified problems, approached from different directions, intensifies rather than competes with each other. These intersections have occurred in the feminist struggle against patriarchal practices of misogyny, ongoing manifestations of racism, growing awareness of how our social location can sustain our analysis of classism, controversial and clashing senses of human sexuality and what I like this word, heteronormativity, that's called heterosexism, and our identification of the way that human expectations of so-called normal embodiments has led to a growing body of literature on what we call ableism. So, we have an ideology of ability on the one side that I want you to hold out here. We have ableism as a kind of a larger word out here, okay? And then around these different terms, we can begin to see our connections, our intersections with somewhat older discourses like racism, sexism, homosexual, heteronormativity, all those other types of things that people have been struggling with. That's, you know, we find ourselves bumping into that and finding strength from a lot that they're talking about. And we didn't think of that at first, actually. We thought they were going to take it away. They thought we were going to take it away. We were both wrong. Like African Americans of the 1950s through the late 1970s changed our self-naming from Negro to Black to African American to African American. Disabled persons have moved past the heteronymous naming, heteronymous meaning somebody else gave it to you, heteronymous naming of ourselves as handicapped, to that of handicapable, differently able, physically or mentally challenged, impaired, disabled persons. And there's one that is more persuasive to many theorists now, and that is, in the last few years, persons with disabilities. All of this ferment of naming represents the result of the flowering of our autonomous selves into a growing political agency. Now it is no shameful thing to identify ourselves as differently normal persons. All of us are just beginning to realize the depth of invisibility, stigma, exclusion, and even backdoor humor that we have faced with other groups in the century-long hegemonic worldview of what we call white supremacy. The ancient social, political, cultural structure that is called patriarchy and impaired bodies. We all are identifying, theoretically attacking, protesting, and recolonizing ourselves away from what disability theorists have called normativity. Now, normativity is what? A part of ableism. Normativity does what? It says what is normal is what we're seeking. Oh, well, Dr. Fletcher, you've been operated 5-6 times. So when are you going to be normal? You know, you ever going to be, I know, maybe like walking again? A few years. I know you got all that stuff. Most of the time, though, what? You just have even an operation. What if the first person that says, so when are you going to be better? That's normative. normativism. That's normativity. It is so deeply enrooted until literally it will fall out of your mouth before you even know that it's there yourself. When are you going to get better? Ooh, girl, you've been sick. When are you getting better? Oh, I'm so sorry. Oh, thank God you got through that. Do you have any idea when you're going to get better? You know, we say those things, don't we? We don't mean to oppress somebody by them, but it's just a part of what the problem of ableism is. It has an unconscious support system called normativity underneath it that is supported against. Okay, so where do we begin? With theoretical models that can be successfully used to describe, recognize impairment using scientific, philosophical, even theological reasoning. Okay, now, I can go through all kinds of reasons why, but I'm going to start with biblical interpretation. That's the oldest. One, ancient Hebrews had a rigid view of the kind of purity, quote unquote, that was required from human beings. Remember, they would say, excuse me, they would ask, who had the audacity to approach the Lord's presence on a yearly basis and to utterly approach the utterly holy, perfect, and unblemished Holy One with anything or any human being whose human blemishes could be interpreted as a what? Insult to God. Or any human being whose human blemishes could be interpreted as well as an insult to God. Now, there's a man named Ford Young who wrote a book called Disabilities, something else, and the church. It's very good. But Amos Young. Y-O-U-N-G. For church folks like us, Young, somebody want to keep right up here at the time. Okay. He says the exacting elaboration of God's holiness code existed and elucidated in Leviticus 21, 16 to 23. That's our favorite verse. Disabled people, we love that verse. Don't have the lemon, don't have the lame, don't have the cripple, don't have this on your back, don't have this on your front, don't have any kind of thing. It was simply says what made sense when viewed from this perspective of viewing perfection, viewed from the perspective of the example. Perfection is an example of human holiness, of God's holiness, sorry. To show how the priests were to be as thorough in their weeding out of all animals for sacrifice in Leviticus 22 as they were in Leviticus 21 of weeding out human beings. So what would be the disqualifying factors for an acceptable priestly presence? They were, and I'll read this to you because it's an interesting section. I'm sure you've heard it before. The Lord spoke to Moses and said, speak to Aaron and say, no one of your offspring throughout their generations who has a blemish may approach to offer food to his God. Or no one who has a blemish shall draw near, or is blind or lame, or one who has a mutilated face or a limb, how about this, too long, or one who has a broken foot or a broken hand, or a hunchback, or a dwarf, or a broken foot, or a broken hand, or a man with a blemish in his eyes, or an itching disease, or scabs, or crushed testicles. No descendant of Aaron, the priest who has a blemish, shall come near to offer the Lord's offerings by fire, since he has a blemish. He shall not come near to offer the food of his God. Now comes one of the most interesting moments in the Bible, which one must struggle to interpret, as God setting down kind of second-class priestly caste in verse 22. You might have heard this. He may eat the food of his God, or the most holy as well as of the holy, but he shall not come near to the curtain and approach the altar, because he has a blemish, that he might not profane my sanctuaries, for I am the Lord, I sanctify them. While it is hurtful, I must remind this list to you to do two things. One, even animals sacrificed during these high holy days had to be unblemished. And two, the sinful stain of human blemish had the power to even profane male, literally unclean. places of God. So while Amos Young has given a fairly convincing argument that explains the connection in the Levitical code of any kind of human imperfection as something that the temple priest would be held to reject, even he admits that one cannot read this passage without a normate perspective. Normate is the same as normative. Even bringing in a Christological perspective in which he specializes and speculates that the stigma of disability across the spectrum is redeemed in the sacrifice of the unblemished and undefective Christ. Young himself is not constant. He even notes how later Christian tradition connects each defect as a particular vice or spiritual weakness. So we get different blemishes later on in Christian tradition: pride, ignorance, vice, vice, spiritual weakness, lassitude, indiscriminate moral perception, carnality. All of those things are associated now with blemishes for which we have to stay away from the altar and that we might have. Further, we must always be careful whenever we read, reflect, and proclaim scriptures that are so incendiary that we must be aware of how current exclusionary interpretations can twist some biblical words into legitimations of ugly, unchristlike prejudgment. Decisions that will stigmatize and divide Christian unity, and of how such use of the Bible lays hatefulness on Scripture. If you would permit me and give me one more judgment, struggling to find out how Jesus Christ would have read and understood such passage would veritably lead us to using the Bible in an unbiblical way. Blemishes from accidents or violent encounters can under nations of unusual embodiment, like being a hunchback or a dwarf, sometimes must be read as ways in which the Lord is calling us to a more radical obedience. Sometimes to Jesus' righteousness, we need to be more obedient to these people, rather than thoughtlessly obedient to what is thoroughly unrighteousness. So, God's faithfulness too is in covenant with the chosen because they're balanced by the wrath of God, or faithfulness. Now, I don't know if you've had a chance, I don't know, Dr. Michael, if you've shown people my book that talks about wrath and
It's on display.
okay, it's on display. I'm going to go through this because this could just get long and real complicated. Let me just go ahead and tell you what I am talking about when I talk about wrath and faithfulness and confession. Wrath is what many people interpret Christian bad things. Rabbi Harry Kushner said it beautifully. Why bad things happen to good people. I think that's a beautiful summation. And so Rabbi Kushner tries to answer that question. Why do bad things happen to good people? And they happen for a variety of reasons. But people that are into the wrath of God say it's because of the wrath of God. God is punishing you in some way. And there are several reasons for that, but radical disobedience is one, being prideful. And there is a wonderful scripture that we have misinterpreted for years. And we always say it over and over again. Pride cometh before pride cometh before what? A fall. Now, is that scripture? No. It says, pride comes before destruction. And a haughty spirit before a fall. That's the example. haughty spirit before God. So pride is what, I mean, I'm not saying it's not connected, and it's not like they don't connect it, but it's just that it's not connected directly. We're going to talk a little bit about that more, too. We talk about spoil the rod, and spare the rod and spoil the child. And say, oh, yeah, that's Bible. Child, I looked this end of it all the way, this way. I looked all over for that scripture. That scripture. Spoil the rod, spare the rod, and spoil the child. They had a lot of things, you know, about you shouldn't spare the rod because if you spare the rod, shows you don't really love, you even hate your son. It has all these different things, but it doesn't have that nice little proverb. It just doesn't. You put stuff in the Bible not even in there. Just because it sounds good, and then we can say it on the pulpit, and people are like, Lord, no, pastor said that must really be right. The pastor said it, it must be right. It must be there somewhere. If you were to ask the pastor where is it? If he said, I'm pastor, he'll tell you. I don't know where it is. Now he can be dishonest and say, it's a way that can be interpreted. Proverbs 95, 227. That's how you do it. But otherwise, you get a really, really strange thing that happens. So, anyway, discipline, it brings on the rage of God, it brings on the wrath of God, and the wrath of God is really, really like God turning out angels of destruction on your life. And so if you are that disobedient, if you are you going against that much what God wants you to do, then the only way God's going to pull you back is to actually let loose things, spirits which are, I don't know what you call them. Are they demons in charge of us? Are they angels that are demonic actors? I don't know what you want to call them. And you know, I look at some of these things that are healed and watch now. They have one called Gabriel. Gabriel's supposed to be the announcer. And he is the strangest looking angel. He got black wings. And he got black. I mean, he does whatever happened to his white wings, you know. And I'm looking for. I know it's color conscious, but how come he got all dirty, nasty looking clothes and stuff? Gabriel, he's supposed to be the announcer, you know. But I mean, so everybody, even kids now, trying to do the Bible, they get all confused which ones are which and who should they assign to who, because there isn't all of this clarity about who's doing what and why. So, the Lord, it says here, loves the manifestations of justice in a society. And he reroutes and will reroute shallow and sentimental interpretations of love, connecting them instead with a proper covenantal reaction to evil. Now, Amos 5:15 proclaims, hate evil, love good, maintain justice. The counter theme, wrath, is also tied as dramatically picturing out of God's anger and judgment, as from a cup in Isaiah 51:17. Wrath is more often personalized as a negative human trait. Proverbs 15:1 says a gentle answer does what? Turns away wrath. It is to be avoided, especially when it is expressed to a king, because the king can go into a rage. You're in trouble. This brings us to the theme of the biblical model again and again, which is that there are more numerous than to count. If it's a fascination to us of physical discipline and punishment of a child, we have Proverbs 3:11-12, which says most succinctly, my son, do not despise the Lord's discipline. Do not resent his rebuke, because the Lord disciplines those he loves, as the father the son he delights in. Here the view of discipline is tied to helping a son to lovingly learn to endure hardship more than a personal physical beating. The notion of discipline as a meaningful but restraining physical whipping or beating appears in several of the following songs, which I listed, and if you all want a copy of this, I guess I'll probably have to make it possible for God to make me able to have a copy of this. Restraining one's self from using the rod is even named as an act of hate. You hate it, that's what you know. So in many churches, including conservative African American ones, that particular one has been reduced to the maxim, spare the rod, spoil the child. Further, when newer versions come along like the NIV and even some of the NKJV translators who translate that word chasten into discipline the child, not chasten. Because the Hebrew words for the two are the same, it is necessary to know that chastening was a public act of whipping. I'll say that again. To chasten someone was to publicly whip them. Tied them to something and whip them. Maybe more than 5 times, maybe more than 15, more than 10. People always got a little nervous if you started going more than 15. It looks like he's trying to just whip it for no reason. But there was that there. And by the way, rods were used. They were slender. They were shaved to be slender and flexible, so that when they could be used, you get a nice pop on the person. In the New Testament, the most famous defense of physically disciplining your child is found in Hebrews 12, which is worthy of being fully quoted, but primarily in our case because it is tied into the disability of being lame. Check this out. My son or daughter, do not make light of the Lord's discipline and do not... Sorry. I'm sorry. Do not lose heart when he rebukes you, that is your father, because the Lord disciplines the one he loves. He chastens everyone he accepts as his daughter and son. Endure hardship as discipline. Again, discipline being the new word instead of saying enduring as chastening. God is treating you as one of his children for what are not disciplined by their father. In other words, who is not chastened by their father. I'm using the New King James Version, okay? Just in case you're wondering where is this from. NIV. I mean, I'm not using what they call it NRSV or any of these, cleaned up versions of that. I'm using the New King James Version. Who are not disciplined by their father. Then you are not legitimate. So you're not even legitimate. You don't get it. Then you are not true sons and daughters at all. Moreover, we have all had human fathers who disciplined us and we respected them for it. How much more should we submit to the Father and live? They disciplined us for a little while as they thought best, but God disciplines in us for our own good in order that we may share in God's holiness. No discipline seems pleasant at the time, but painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Now comes the part that I want you to really listen to that I found amazing. Therefore, strengthen your feeble arms and your weak knees. Make level paths for your feet, so that the lame may not be disciplined, but healed. I don't know if you knew that was still. That's right after that one. Not only, whip them, but you kind of lame, you got a little something on, you better strengthen up and pull yourself up. Take it like a man. I don't have it in my house, by the way, because we're to try to be different about being man and women, you know. I immediately got that crash. That question stuff out, you know, when you say to somebody you're mad at a man, man up. What does that mean? You know, you want him to be mean? You want him to not feel anything? Or are you saying, respect me? Well, if you're saying respect me, then say respect me. Don't say man up. You want to strengthen, be strong. That's fine. Just say be strong. You can take it. You're strong enough. Even this, you're a strong man. Isn't that good? That's a good man. You're a strong man. You can take it. But man up, that's got a whole lot. Do you feel it? I mean, do you feel all the stuff around that? There's a whole patriarchal, supremacist ideology behind man up. So please, go home, talk to your husbands, your wives about it, see what they say. You know, they might not like it, they might just keep on using it, but talk to them about it, see what they think, because I think it's worth talking about. All right, so we talked about that. Now, certainly for Christians, some of our greatest thinkers, from Apostle Paul to Augustine, Luther to Calvin, women like Margie Sue Hoppe and even Martin Luther King Jr. have wrestled with the connections between the Garden of Eve purity and morality and the conscientious area of their lifelong pursuit of a spiritually righteousness and destabilized state. All these people had trouble with that. They all struggled. Through time, many have tried to slowly work their way through the obscure professional, ethical, theological, philosophical gobbledygook, even creating a virtually freestanding place. This model is the oldest, therefore, that biblical model, and in most of the rest regions of the world overrun by impoverishment, it remains the best way to comfort us, on the one hand, and control our behavior at the same time. Back into the midst of time, how always just been easier to blame God or the gods than to do any other kind of analysis. Now, that's the oldest. Now, the second oldest is the one that we are living in. Ableism. We have normativity. And then right above normativity, what do we have? We have the biblical model. Now, after the biblical model comes the medical model. It is the model that all of us contemporary persons rely upon, from the privacy of our doctor's consultation to the testing deployed by the range of machines that are typical in all of our first world hospitals. Like venerable x-rays, CAT scans, radio waves, indicative of what is going on in our tissues, sonograms that detect otherwise hidden problems. And even one that I can't use, if they gave it on me, they say my bones will shake so bad, I wouldn't even be able to sit still for years. That's the magnetic resonance thing, you know. All the bones inside of me, they would magnetize and I'd be in some good trouble. So, magnetic resonance. That's another one, of course, that is great in finding problems. These machines aid doctors in making more exact and precise diagnoses, and even to the diagnostics that our doctors can put all of their scans from those machines to make more accurate diagnoses than in the past. The medical model that we all embrace as the latest thing employ all of its energies, talents, and research capacities toward advanced explanations, indications of alleviation and elimination of disability. They do that. They put all their energy. They want to alleviate it. They want to make it easier. They want to alleviate it. And then they want to eliminate it. Impossible. The medical model is very expensive. Its usage is really confined to the first world that can afford it. And guess what? So all of us sitting up here, unless you come from some country that is not American, you probably are not going to even think about this medical model too much because this is just not something that you can afford in your country. Although more and more charitable organizations are donating this first world machinery to medical institutions that are created in the areas where little to no access as a kind of enormous electrical resource resources needing to bring, deliberately deindustrialized, undeprived, and electronically disorganized state of the two-thirds world to use such medical devices to the entire world. But frankly, it's just too expensive and would require an enormous benefit and investment of determined first world champion entrepreneurs and visionaries to create the adequate conditions for a widespread usage of this financial and electronic resource to create a medical mode universally acceptable to all human beings. This may sound unrelated to the problem of disability, but if most of your country's people have a wide range of multiple disabling conditions like sickle cell anemia or advanced stages of malaria, HIV/AIDS, crippling arthritis, terribly disfiguring rheumatic joint and bone conditions, finding a way to spread first world medical machines becomes invariably unusable to the Western educated two-thirds world doctors. How often they give up an event hoping that their so-called colleagues and friends would bring any more than what was their most advanced training to the doctors, whose sparse medicines like penicillin, sanitary areas where the worst inflicted can be isolated from spreading ones and other infectious diseases to those who are still unaffected or unaffected. Hospitals in the backwoods of Africa are not viewed by the rest or the vast majority of the native peoples where the sick come to live, but rather it is where the sick come to die. When and until this perception is reversed, hospitals will not be places of healing and usage of the most advanced technologies in the world. They will continue to be viewed as places to die. About 15% of the world, or 750 million people, have significant mental and physical disability, according to the WHO, or World Health Organization. 1 billion, or 15% of the global population, some 20% are 1/5, and then up to 1 billion people, which are 20% of the people in the world, live this way. Most live in utterly impoverished areas of the globe with much less education and worse health outcomes than our part of the world. So the themes in the medical novel are, if we're looking for the heart of this lecture, I'm approaching it. The main problem that all disabled persons, from the ones who suffer just a bit to those whose pain is various shades of constant damning daily, I would tell you without biting my tongue that this idea of some kind of medical normativity is the most often unspoken yet assumed real difference discerned between various levels of disabled people. We are a people like any other with variety. Drugs take years to safely develop into treatments, and their efficacy is never universal. No two individuals who have properly administered drugs can expect to be completely freed from disability. Yet the long-term research development and re-diagnosis, re-experimentation, and validation of those drugs arise from that tender, vulnerable inner part of us that, if you would let me make a simplistic analogy, wants our mommy to take away the ouchie. The mommy's role in the model of medicalization is sophisticated, seems to uplift us to the belief that mommy really is taking care of our ouchies. Yet this is the practical outshot of the ways in which the medical norm is marketed and accepted by the vast majority of people in our first world. American Imperial Society, it's the regularly habituated improvisation of ways of being we can use as we face life's daily yet unpredictable demands. It is the acceptable range of difference allowed in the variety of environments that we inhabit. The norm, you would like that norm and normativity. The norm is the recognized and accepted manner in which persons can be standardized A norm is always uncomfortable with the different. In other words, and they're uncomfortable even if you're different like genius. Like, your norm is supposed to be up to, was it 110 or 108? Maybe by 120, you'll all get a little nervous from you. Really smart, And if you go up someplace like 170, you're like, and because you're not the norm anymore. You're not the norm if you're below 70 or 80. Oh yeah, he's real far below the norm. So norms are used to standardize us, to put us into a place where we can be examined and evaluated. A norm is always uncomfortable with the different because the very nature of a norm is to de-emphasize, accommodate, and even homogenize all acceptable ways that we can be different. Normativism spells it out from our earliest childhood memories as clearly defined boundaries. These boundaries are enforced and reinforced by the normals, who made it clear that an infraction against normalcy would be quite costly to you to remain in the safe anonymity of the norm. It is precisely to this individuality of the medical model that its ability to actually heal our problems are shown. It can be fruitfully changed into the following question. Will Janetta get better now that she's on this new medication? She's tried everything. And her hopes are so high. I just tried everything. I just don't want to see her hopes get dashed and smashed into dirt, as it was true for the last 3 other experiments. Doctors hear these things every day, don't they? If you're not a doctor, you might hear it as a minister, pastoral counselor, am I right? Janetta, Loretta, whatever her name is, or his name. This man named Cybers notes that there are 3 problematic results of medicalization. First, people are treated as individuals with individual problems, and this means that they are alienated and become defective persons who finally experience their problems as individual concerns, and the disabled are prevented from organizing politically, having no true common problems, because each impaired person's impairment is not exactly like that of another. Viewed as defective, thinking about mentally impaired persons, even one's citizenship rights can be called into question and ultimately removed. That without being a political person, medicalization model drives the disabled into more and more socio-political, like a political strangulation. In other words, if I just think of this as my problem, it's not your problem, because after all, medical people, they always have different problems from each other, that's going to politicizing. I'm not going to get together with you to think about how we're both being used by a medicalization. Fine. We're not. We're different. And so it's a real problem. And we find that there are terms like defective that are hurtful, but they are never heard just one time. The onus of being defective is that the concrete pain and suffering of disability is at last a cost to bear. And it is at this very point that we can see now necessary to bring this medical model into the operations of a social model. Okay? So we have at the bottom the biblical, then the normative, now we're at the social. And each one of these, by the way, has grown out of the other one. None of them just suddenly appeared. They appeared because of what was going on. I'm sorry, one thing I didn't notice, and this is what I really found was true about me, I'm always in a certain level of pain. And the doctors always come in with these great, nasty little perfect smiles on their faces. How are we feeling? And they have this little pain chart, and the pain chart has it from 1 to 10. And the 1 has, this smiling guy, and the 2, his face is like there, and the 5, his face is like this. Now 6, his face starts to crawl up, by 7, he's like this. By 8, he's like this. By 9, he's like, him. So I looked at him and I said, I am always at a 5. I said, when I have to come to the hospital, I'm at a 10. He said, a 10? How can you stand it? I said, well, let me give you an example. This summer when they came in, this was last summer, in July, in August. And they brought me in because I was in so much pain I just couldn't even sit still. And the doctors gave me a morphine shot. And, you know, they think morphine is very magical medicine. And they gave me morphine, and I sat there and looked at them. They said, how are you feeling? And I was fine. I felt much better. So I feel better. Feel better. He gave me enough to knock out on that person. How do you feel better? You know? They said, well, we'll fix you. They went and they got another one. You know what I did? I took a little nap for about 5 minutes. I woke up and said, no, I really do feel better. Thank you. But she said, you're still not asleep. I said, but at least it gave me about 10 minutes rest. Sometimes, you see, again, like individual problems. This is Garth's individual problem. This doesn't belong to Robert's, and this does not belong to Reverend McMickle's problem. But actually it does. Where the medicalization model, we're all in the same boat because we're all being treated by similar kind of medications. And while we're very different individually, where I had to take 2 morphine shots before it even began to slow me down, and maybe 1 morphine shot would have, you know, Dr. Morphine, Dr. McMickle would just be out. And he just, you know, they say, wow, you know, that's, and they would be happy. This is the way it was supposed to work. Not for me. That way. All right, so anyway, the 4th model is the social model. We'll go through this quickly. Social model fills the discourse of disability by widening the conversation into its political and sociological resonance. In other words, the social model insists that disability and impairment are a social contract and social construct. A social construct. My little sister over here is kept on answering my questions about head to mind. What is your name over here, dear?
Lori.
Lori, do you have any idea what a social construct is? It's a little different from a social construct.
I do, but I'm going to let you go ahead.
You know, give myself a little rest so I can figure out more. Okay, a social construct is what has been, as it were, built by society. It has been constructed by various beliefs and systems and ways of being in the society. So we call it a social construct. One of the best ways that I can talk about a social construct is to talk, and I do in my other books, about masculinity and femininity. Yes, we are different. We have different reproductive systems that also have produced different hormones in our bodies. And those hormones in our bodies make us react to certain situations of sexual contact, let's say, and sexual attractiveness or non-attractiveness are different. So, you know, we have to kind of be careful about that. But basically, we're socially constructed the same way as human beings. You know? And when we socially construct men and women the same, it's fascinating what happens. Well, you know, my sisters, they get on that plane and they fly just like anybody else flying F-16. You know, they're not ashamed. They have to get on and do that 3-year degree or 6 or whatever, and they do it. We only have 3% of 97% of us that are trying to defend our country. Shoot, I heard that. I said, "Where's here? Give me a thing with this. I'm gonna go down there and get me a computer." I said, "What would you like me to play with one of those drone model things?" "Yeah, I'll do it." I said, because I think that's terrible. 3% of us are protecting 97%. There's something a little skewed about that. Yes. Especially when other countries that are trying to take us over, like China and Russia, are dedicating 25% and 45%. really think we're that superior? Guess what? It's not going to work. Anyway, so being a deformity or freak, a disabled person has an identity. When one is dislodged from a position of socially structured disability, then one is able to situate themselves as a participant in a, quote, structure by which the person identifies becomes identified with. A set of social narratives, ideas, myths, values, and types of knowledge of varying ability, usefulness, and verifiability. So identifying the disabled person is no longer an individual medical case, but is, quote, a member of a particular social body, a fully human being. Now, what does this mean insofar as disability is concerned? If I am not merely this or that individual person who has been somebody's experimental subject, but that I was a subject worthy of being recognized through my participation in the symbolic, linguistic, ontological witness of what it means to be a human being, so spoken, then I need to return to that issue of normativity again. Without trying to outdo one another, it is clear that there has been one central issue shared at the political heart of most civil rights issues. Liberation movements of the last 60 years. Here we go. The issue is what? Of how one's identity, of race, gender, class, etc., can be accepted as a new norm. Or shut down as a threat, which is what's happened. They didn't like the fact that the Black Panthers said they wanted to be the new norm of police activity in the black community. So they went down to the Black Panthers and they waited until they were asleep and they shot them down like they were dogs. Male, female, everybody. My mother had such beautiful things to say about the Black Panthers. I was just crying like a baby. She was crying too. I said, why are you crying, Mom? She said, because the Black Panthers are people that protected me. She said, I don't feel safe in the community anymore. Nobody's going to protect me. Those cops didn't do anything. A new norm of what? Called police protection. And they were what? Shut down. So, without waiting for the supreme invisible councils of normativity to bless, reject, or qualify or reject, the great we, which is all who are not completely ensconced and comfortable in established ways of being, are moving forward even now. Disabled persons, no less than any historically systematized group, are the masters of what? Historical grounding analysis, deconstructing energies, promoting the destruction of civilization and tradition. Said another way, this gaze of normalcy, or the normate perspective, stands at the very root of overturning oppressive, exclusionary, and stigmatizing practices. It was and still is the nature of all the coldest and most calculating oppressive gazes that have been combined, colonized, enslaved, and exploited by those who suffer. The medical model focuses on the pain. There is great pain at this intersection between the normative gazes, judgments, sexualized and genderized of all of us so-called minorities. Further, normativities set the boundaries of being and non-being for us and the other, so precious to those who most cling to the normate perspective. From within itself, in order to maintain control over our very humanity, we are either normal or we are anti-normal. In normativity, one cannot simply exist, blind, deformed, lame, manic, aggressive. No! Those are not condemnations that nail down the certitude of your stigma. Normativity establishes clear boundaries of beauty, so embedded in our society here in the United States, that in the 1800s one could be charged for violating, check this out, in the 1800s in Chicago, you could be charged for violating the ugly law. Can you imagine that? Stop making me laugh. Hang out out a legal fine for committing the illegality of offending the oh so precious neutrality of being normal. One particularly specific and rigid city ordinance was that of Chicago. It was passed in 1880 and was not repealed until 1973, which read this: any person who is diseased, maimed, mutilated, or in any way deformed, so as to be unsightly or disgusting object, or an improper person to be allowed in or out on the streets, highways, thoroughfares, or public places in this city, shall not therein or thereon expose themselves to public view, under the penalty of $1, which would be $20 a day, for each offense. Man, you get a whole bunch of reasons why you pay hundreds of thousands of dollars. You're offending all of us, ain't you? You're ugly. Get over there and don't look at me, please. Such laws are stark examples of the invisibility and embeddedness of ableist environments. They are the most resistant to the insistence of disabled activists that the environment must be transformed to become accessible. So in other words, another way of talking about this thing is to clarify what motto gave birth to it. Okay, so access might rightly be called both the way to understand theories of disability from a social rather than individual level, and its primary theme. And I think I could probably go on and on and on from there, but I want to just show how we...
All together, wrap it up.
Yep, we're going to have to wrap it up tonight, because we have some Presbyterians in here, and we don't sit as long as Baptists.
Okay, all right.
So can we have your kind of closing statements,
Sure.
and
You know,
see if we can have a couple of questions?
Let's do that.
That would be fabulous.
No,
Thank
let's, because I've gotten through several, and I think that the one that I wanted to emphasize the most was the normative. So go right ahead. Please ask me what questions have arisen in your mind.
Do we have a question or two that folks would like to ask?
Yes, go ahead.
I want to ask, and I don't know if I'm going to phrase this right, about the intersectionality of your models, biblical, normative, medical, and social, the intersectionality of them, and if they don't fit the standard norm, are they considered, are we considered, or are the people considered disabled? In other words, what I'm saying is,
Yes.
if we're living in an oppressive, discriminatory state, and we feel that, and there's like this struggle of uneasy silence you're talking about, and we don't raise up to address that, and there's a different normal that is living like pretty well, we're considered disabled.
And that's the reason why it's so important for us to understand that the normalization model is only effective, it's very effective in a lot of ways. It limits us, it has these problems and these, and I mentioned those, but it's very effective for people like us that are living in the first world, because we're in touch with some type of health care, even Obamacare. I mean, if you didn't like it, it would still open you up to first world care. And first world care would mean that you would be able to be taken care of. However, it would not take away any stigma or any of the exclusion of being considered a disabled person.
Oh, that's okay. Amen. Thank you.
Yes.
Well, I have a question. I'm working with individuals who have mental and physical disabilities of various types. And I guess I'm wondering if you would speak to how all of these play together in your experience with how the church has sought to welcome them in, because the whole point, we're moving from an institutional model to a residential community model, and have been for several years now.
I hate to sound like I'm asking you to only do this because you so, but really, I do think that Mark is the answer to that question. You know, the big question for tomorrow was, okay, look, I got all that he was saying, so what? What are we gonna do in our churches? And that's gonna be a large part. So what are we gonna do in our churches? And there is a kind of a reevaluation of our values coming up with compassion. I tried to use the what do you call it? The letters HIV, AIDS, to put down what do we have underneath H. I won't even say I. Intravenous, no. It might be interdynamic or internal, or rather than external. Or, V is a really fascinating one to try to get at for a new model of church, being church. And you're saying that we're moving to a residential model.
Well, we've moved, the state is pushing that and has been for several years now, but at the same time, these individuals are still very isolated typically from the larger community and from especially places of worship. That could be a natural support system for them and a place where these intersections can really come together to change the societal norms. So I guess you got to the heart of it, of how that's shifting and moving and how we can do that better.
Yeah, that's like I said, that's what I was definitely coming up to tomorrow, because what I'm going to ask in the central of the whole thing is, so what does this mean to us as church?
So this is a good time for us to give that commercial for tomorrow, to remind you that we're here in this room or upstairs, in 117 from 9 to noon with Dr. Baker-Fletcher to talk a little bit more about the lived-in practice, what he's been putting forth this theory this evening, and the lived practice. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, 117 on the first floor. Let me just take this opportunity to thank you,